welcome. Do appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to join us in today's Getting Started with Prisma Access. It's part 4 series to help secure remote sites with Prisma Access. I'm Sydney Mitchell, part of the customer success team for Strata. Now, in terms of what we're going to be covering today, if we get into the next slides, for the next upcoming 45 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing how to plan for and deploy Prisma Access for remote networks, as well as configure Prisma Access for remote networks. And then we will, at the end, as I mentioned, have time for some Q&A. So if you do have questions, again, you can still ask them throughout the session. But if you want to hold off and ask them at the end, no worries. We will also cover a little bit about some 2.0, just a reminder, as well as self-help resources. So just be aware of that, and that's going to be towards the tail end of the session. In terms of upcoming webinars, just a reminder, folks, next Wednesday, April 7th, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have a deep dive of Prisma Insights, as well as Prisma Access 2.0 upgrade. So those of you who've been with us since the beginning, we had the 2.0 session. This was late February, so this will of course, go over some of that material again, but also some of the changes and updates that has happened since. So definitely join us for that. We typically have office hours every Friday, but for this week, since Palo Alto Networks is observing a holiday this Friday, we will not have an office hours, but we will reconvene next Friday's office hours, which is at 2 p.m. So just a little heads up there in case you were wondering. And yeah, so no office hours this Friday. In terms of the next slide here, we have our tour guides, right? So I already introduced myself. I'm Sydney Mitchell. I'm kind of emceeing this, but we also have our presenters, Anil Vidya, as well as Khurram Shahzad. Now, Anil's going to talk about towards the later half of the session, just kind of a reminder of 2.0 self-help resources, whereas Khurram's going to guide you through getting set up with remote networks in Prisma Access. Just a reminder, all this information can already be found within our self-help resources via Tech Docs, as well as live community. All right, so the last thing I'll cover is the prerequisites, right? So where are we in the onboarding journey, right? So some of the things that we definitely want to, once you're considering setting up your remote networks, definitely want to have these all in place, whether it's Prisma Access, Cortex Data Lake licenses are activated, having high availability for Panorama setup being done, cloud service plugins installed, your ports used in Panorama added to the allowed list, with the latest preferred Panorama PanOS installed. Also Prisma Access APIs to allowed, TCP ports and FQDN setup for Cortex Data Lake, device groups and templates in place, service infrastructure subnets are completed, at least one service connection setup completed. And if you do have mobile users licenses and that option, definitely have some of those set up already as well. And if you, again, have been part of our series, our journey throughout this pilot, you've gotten a lot of this information to kind of guide you through this whole experience. Without further ado, I will transition this off to our grand speaker, Khurram Shahzad, who's going to go over the whole setting up remote networks within Prisma Access. Thank you, Khurram. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Sydney. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar of Getting Started with Prisma Access series. Today, we will be covering how to onboard remote network, and we talk about how to secure your remote sites and branch offices. Let's have a look into the key Prisma Access concepts before I jump into the actual configurations. So as your business scales and your office locations become geographically distributed, Prisma Access for Networks allows you to separately onboard your remote network locations and deliver best-in-breed security for your users. To connect your remote network location to the Prisma Access, you can use Palo Alto Networks Next-Gen firewalls or third-party IPsec compliant device, including SD-WAN, that can establish an IPsec tunnel to the service. Prisma Access for Networks allows you to pick the geographic location where you want to deploy your Prisma Access to secure your remote network location. So if your remote network location require access to infrastructure in your corporate headquarters to authenticate users or to enable access to critical network assets, you must create a service connections. Service connection was our second part of the Getting Started webinar series. I believe most of you have already attended. If you have not attended or didn't get a chance to attend that, we have a recording available. So feel free to refer to that recording in which we talk about in detail how to set up service connection. So in order to enable the access to the critical assets, you must enable the service connection, or you must set up a service connection. If the remote network location is autonomous and does not need access to the infrastructure, you don't need to set up the service connection unless you have the mobile user also, and you want your remote network locations and your mobile user to communicate. So you should set up service connection as well. Choose the right Prisma Access location. For the best user experience, select the region and the location in the same country as your branch office to ensure the best experience for your users. If the location is not available in the same country as your branch office is, choose a location that is the nearest or having the same language as the users are using. Have the IP subnet ready for the Prisma Access to route the traffic to your remote networks. You need to provide the routing information for the subnetworks that you want Prisma Access to secure. You can do this in several ways. You can either define a static route to each subnetwork at the remote location, or you can configure a BGP, or you can also use the combination of both static and BGP. Bandwidth allocation per compute location, or you can how to allocate bandwidth across Prisma Access location for remote networks. In our 2.0 upcoming release, we are introducing a feature aggregate bandwidth. You can use this feature and allocate bandwidth per compute location. But if you are running today 1.7 plugin and have already deployed your remote networks, you cannot use the aggregate bandwidth feature. I will talk about in detail about the aggregate bandwidth feature in our upcoming slides. Let's have a look into the configurations. And before I jump into the configuration and talk about each step, let's watch a quick 9 minutes video in which we talk about how to set up a remote network.
In this demonstration, we're going to go through the process of onboarding a remote network. The process of onboarding the network is simple, but there are some other things that we need to do ahead of time so that as we go through this onboarding process, other resources that we need are already configured. I'm in Panorama, Configuration, and Remote Networks. The first thing I'm going to do is click on the gear to the right of Settings. You need to choose the parent device group for where the device group for remote networks will appear within the Panorama hierarchy. Under Templates, you manage your Prisma Access template stacks not under Panorama and Templates, but rather here under the Cloud Services configuration. Because I have made a remote network, it has already created something called the Remote Network Template. This is something that is automatically created. But I could also add other templates that I had created into the template stack and manage that template stack here. So here is where I manage my template and template stacks for my remote network template stack. And here is where I specify what device group will be the parent device group for my remote network. The overlapping subnets option will be discussed later in the slide presentation. I'm going to click on OK to close out of this. The next option that I have to the right here is zone mapping. I'm going to click on the gear over to the right-hand side, and it asks me to map my zones. Remember, Prisma Access only has the concept of untrusted and trusted zones. While I may have zones that already exist within Panorama, from a security policy application perspective, the zone structure in Prisma Access is simplified to trusted and untrusted. I'm going to leave my internet zone in the untrusted bucket, and I'm going to move my extranet and my usernet zones over as trusted zones within my Prisma Access configuration and click on OK. The other thing that I need to be ready for is I need to have my VPN tunnel configuration correct in order to set up my remote network. I've already created these artifacts, but let's review them now. I'm going to go over to the Network tab under Template. And here, I have created a Boston gateway. I'll open this up. I've named it Boston Gateway. I've specified my IKE version. I've said that my peer address or the IPsec device that is out at the Boston location will be dynamic. He's not going to have a static IP address. I've set up my pre-shared authentication key and how the Prisma Access side of the IPsec tunnel will identify this remote IPsec device at the Boston location by FQDN email address, and I have specified that here. I'm going to click on OK. And now I'm going to take a look at my IPsec tunnels, which I've also configured. I've created the Boston RN IPsec tunnel. I've used my Boston gateway. I have specified IPsec crypto profile of default as I have done this configuration. I'm not configuring proxy IDs because I'm assuming that the IPsec device that is at the Boston location supports route-based VPN tunnels. But if, for instance, I was making a VPN tunnel to a device that required proxy ID configuration or required a crypto map configuration, here with my proxy IDs, I could override the concept that the Palo Alto Prisma Access environment uses the universe as the set of addresses on both sides of the tunnel and relies upon routing to select the interesting traffic. Now, with all these things created, now I can go through the process of onboarding the Boston network. I've got my templates and my device groups properly configured. I have my zone mapping done, and I've done the work to configure my IPsec tunnel on the Prisma Access side so that the Boston location can initiate its tunnel up. Next, I'm going to go down here to add, and I'm going to give this a name. This name is important. This is the name that's going to show up in the log files associated with traffic originating from the Boston network. While I might have used zone names in my policy construction, the name here is what will show up in the log files under the zone field, not the actual zone names. Under the bandwidth option, I can select the symmetric bandwidth that I will have allocated to the Boston remote network. This is going to give me the same speed from the Boston network as well as down to the Boston network. For my location, I want to choose a location that is geographically close to the Boston environment, okay? This is going to give me the fastest speed that I can get in my connection to the Boston environment, reducing latency of literally the distance of fiber that traffic has to flow across. Now, I'm going to choose the IPsec tunnel that we just reviewed that I've already created for this. I'm going to choose the Boston Remote Network VPN tunnel. Finally, I need to set up my routing. This is going to tell the Prisma Access environment what is in the Boston network, what addresses exist down there, okay? If people try and connect to resources that exist in the Boston network. So I'm going to click on add here, and I'm going to say that the 172.168.50.0/24 network lives at the Boston environment. Finally, I can configure a secondary IPsec tunnel. This would be an active-passive tunnel configuration, with the tunnel that I've configured here being the active and this being the backup or secondary tunnel. This is that if I had dual ISPs, and if I had a problem with one of those ISPs, then I could fail over to the second one if that tunnel were to go down. That's what this configuration option here is for. And finally, I'm going to click on OK. So now I've configured my template and my device group settings. I've mapped my zones. I've configured the IPsec tunnel information within the Prisma Access Cloud, and I have set up this onboarded network. The last thing that I need to do is come up here and click on Commit, and I can go through my commit and push. Commit saves these settings to Panorama. Push propagates them to the Prisma Access Cloud environment. I'm going to click on Commit and Push, and when it brings me in here, I'm going to click on Edit Selections. Because here, under the Prisma Access tab, I can say what changes I want to push up into the Prisma Access Cloud, and then finally, I could click on OK to propagate this information into Prisma Access. At this point, Prisma Access would be ready for the Boston location to initiate the VPN tunnel up to it to complete the process of onboarding my first remote network.
Let's have a look into the detail each and every steps involved in the configuration. Step number 1, you will log into your Panorama Cloud Service section, and in the configuration section, you will click on the remote networks and edit the settings by clicking the gear icon. In the template section, add any templates that contain the configuration you want to push to Prisma Access for networks. If you have existing templates that contain your zone configuration or IPsec tunnel, IKE gateway, or crypto profile settings, you can add them to the predefined remote network template stack to simplify the onboarding process. You can also add more than one template. Also, select the device group for Prisma Access for remote networks, and you can also select existing device group or use shared. This device group will push all the configuration, which includes security profiles, security policy, and other policy objects such as application group, HIP, authentication policy to the Prisma Access to enforce consistent policy to your remote networks. Here you can select a template and the device groups. Overlapped subnets. This is the overlapped subnet you saw earlier in the demo also. As a general rule of thumb, you cannot have any overlapping subnet within a Prisma Access deployment. The subnets, this is applicable to subnets for all remote network location, your service connection, your Prisma Access for mobile user, IP address pool. It cannot be overlapped. However, in some situations, you cannot avoid having overlapping. For example, your organization has two WAN links that you want to combine for a higher bandwidth throughput in a single remote network location, which will be an active-active WAN deployment. Or you want to configure an overlapping subnet deployment by design. For example, you are using the same network topology and the IP assignments across multiple retail locations. Or you acquired a company that uses the subnets that overlap with your existing subnets. So in that case, Prisma Access allows you to onboard remote network locations with overlapping subnets, as long as you select this checkbox, overlap subnets, or you allow it. There are some restrictions with the overlap subnets in terms of traffic flow. For example, from remote to internet, onbound internet will be available, but from remote network to remote network, traffic will not flow with overlap subnets. And some other details you can refer to our tech docs. All the details are provided there. Configure a DNS proxy setting for your remote network. This is an optional step which Prisma Access allows you to specify a DNS servers to resolve both domains that are internal to your organization and external. If you're not specifying any setting or not configuring your domain, Prisma Access does not proxy DNS requests for remote networks. In remote network device group, you can, and in the policies section, make sure that you are adding a security policy rule with the application of DNS and an action of allow the DNS traffic. Without a security policy rule to allow the DNS traffic, DNS resolution will not happen. And if your configuration, if you configure Prisma Access to proxy the DNS request from your remote networks, update the DNS settings on all the endpoints in that network which are using Prisma Access. This is a remote network IP, and you will allow in your security policy this IP. You can also add one or more DNS proxy settings because you have the option here to configure for the internal domains as well as for external domains. You can select a region or a worldwide, or you can add multiple region-specific DNS proxy settings or specify a DNS proxy for one or more region and specify another for the worldwide. Specify IP addresses for the primary DNS and the secondary DNS. Or you can also use the same, if you want to use the same DNS to resolve your internal and external, so you will see the drop-down menu while configuring the DNS, and you can use the same as internal. Or you can also use the default Prisma Access DNS server, and you can select use cloud default option. By default, all zones in the Prisma Access for networks template stack are classified as untrusted zones. If you have not defined zones, or if the template in the remote network stack do not have zone configuration, you can come and check and push and configure your zones. If you don't have configured the zones in your template stack, you can configure, and for each zone you want to designate as trusted, in the zone section, click on the gear icon here and add from untrusted to trust. Bandwidth allocation. As I mentioned in one of my previous slides starting, if you're running 1.7 cloud service plugin version 1.7 and have already deployed remote networks, you cannot use aggregate bandwidth feature. If you're running 1.8 plugin and have deployed your remote networks with 1.8 plugin, you can use aggregate bandwidth feature using and assign your bandwidth per compute location. With the upcoming 2.0, when you will upgrade to the new plugin 2.0, you will be getting the aggregate bandwidth feature. But from 1.7 to 2.0, you will not be able to migrate your remote networks to aggregate bandwidth feature until you delete all your remote networks and redeploy, then you will able to use this aggregate bandwidth feature. There is a short video which explains aggregate bandwidth feature and how to configure the aggregate bandwidth for remote networks. It will be shared in the chat box, and you can refer to that video. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. In the onboarding settings, once you onboard remote networks, specify a name to identify in the infrastructure that will secure the remote network. And one thing important to add here, if for the aggregate bandwidth, if you want to use aggregate bandwidth and already using QoS or secure outbound access, then you cannot use aggregate bandwidth feature because aggregate bandwidth feature is not supported with QoS today. You cannot, okay, in the onboarding section, once you onboarding your remote networks, specify the name and make sure you are giving the name as per your architectural topology, because once you deployed, you cannot change the name until you delete and redeploy. Prisma Access Remote Networks supports ECMP load balancing. If you want to use ECMP load balancing, you can use that, but again, QoS is not supported with ECMP load balancing and not with the static routes. If you want to use ECMP, you have to use BGP. There are two options in the onboarding section. You will see none, do not use ECMP, and you will be using a single remote network tunnel. That's the only choice you are giving, or enable with the symmetric return, and by enabling that, you can specify up to 4 IPsec tunnels for this remote network connection and force Prisma Access to use the same link for the return traffic as it sent the traffic. In this screenshot, you can see here this slide, the option here ECMP load balancing. From the drop down menu, you will see here ECMP with the symmetric return or none. If you're using a BGP deployment, in the BGP section, you will see here 3 options: enable, summarize mobile user routes before advertising, and not advertise. If you want to use BGP, enable the BGP. Summarize mobile user routes, it will reduce the number of mobile users IP subnet advertisement over BGP to your customer premises equipment or CPE. By default, Prisma Access advertises the mobile user's IP address in the blocks of /24. So if you're summarizing them, Prisma Access advertise the pool based on the subnet you specified. These are options: advertise, summarize, and don't advertise the Prisma Access routes. Advertise the default route means you are allowing Prisma Access to advertise the default route for your remote network. And if you're checking this box, make sure that you are publishing your default routes before making the selection. And also make sure that your network does not have another default route being advertised by the BGP, or you could introduce routing issues in your network. Do not advertise Prisma Access routes. This option prevents the Prisma Access BGP pairs from forwarding the routes into your organization's network. Depending on your routing or organization design or routing design, you can select any of those options. You can select here the IPsec termination node, tunnels, either it's BGP enabled or not, and enter here the allocated bandwidth. As I mentioned, if we are using Cloud Service Plugin version 1.7, you will be onboarding your remote networks based on allocating the bandwidth based on per location. And if it's 1.8 or you have not deployed or plan to deploy using plugin version 2.0, then you can use aggregate bandwidth feature and you will allocate bandwidth per location. Select the IPsec termination node from your deployment, and it should be IPv4 only. Make sure that the pair address in the iGateway configuration must be unique for each tunnel. IPsec tunnel you select from a template, it must auto key exchange. And if you're onboarding a multiple remote networks to the same location with the dynamic IK pairs, you must use the same IK crypto profile for all the remote network configurations. Secondary WAN, enable secondary WAN. If you have secondary WAN link at your location, enable the secondary WAN. Make sure to create a unique IPsec tunnel for each remote network secondary WAN. Prisma Access does not support resulting or reusing the same IPsec tunnel for secondary WAN in multiple remote networks. So if you use static route, tunnel failover time is less than 15 seconds for the time of detection, depending on your WAN provider. And if you're configuring a BGP routing and have enabled the tunnel monitoring, the shortest default hold time to determine that the security parameter index SPI is filling is the tunnel monitor, which removes all the routes to appear when it detects the tunnel failure for 15 consecutive seconds. When a secondary tunnel is successfully installed, the secondary route takes precedence until the primary tunnel comes back. And if the primary and secondary are both up, the primary route takes priority. Enable the routing for your remote networks. As I mentioned earlier, we are supporting two modes of routing, two types of routing as of today, static routes or dynamic routing, which is BGP. You can assign the static routes or configure a BGP, define the pair AS numbers, local addresses, and secret keys. QoS. If you require to enable the quality of service for the remote network and specify a QoS profile. Or if you don't have any existing QoS profile, you can create a new one. At this point, you are done with half of your configuration. Now it's time to perform the commit and push to the Prisma Access Cloud. Perform your commit and push. After some time of you performing your commit, it will take some time, and you will see that in your onboarding section, you will see service IP address. Find the service IP address for this remote network by selecting Panorama Cloud Service Status Network Details. And you must configure this as a pair IP address to set up IPsec tunnel between your remote network and remote network location and the Prisma access. Check the local IP address for the device. If remote network location is, if you're performing any NAT on your remote network location. Now you have got the service IP address. By using service IP address, you can form or establish a tunnel and configure a tunnel to other pair, other side, or to a remote network location. But make sure that you have set up all the policies. Add the policy rules. You can select the remote network device group, parent device group, and policy, create the policies and allow the traffic rules. And similarly, make sure that you enable the logging to the Cortex data lake and your all log forwarding profiles are already in place. Commit all your changes, commit and push to devices, and you will see as soon as the other side of the pair tunnel is coming up and it start negotiating with the Prisma with the remote network, the Prisma access, the configuration status and the tunnel status is getting green, which shows that your tunnel is up. You can also verify the remote connection, the BGP connection status. Log into the Panorama, Cloud Service section, Status, and Network Details section. Click on the BGP status, which will give you all the information local IP, pair IP, AS number, status, and all those details. So all this is good. If it shows green, it means all is good. If there's any status is showing any warning sign, it means that either there is some issue with the configurations, or it will show you status as a provisioning, which means that commits are still being performed to the cloud. And that's it. We have completed setup of remote networks for the Prisma Access. Here I will hand over to Anil, who will talk about Prisma Access 2.0 updates. Over to you, Anil.
Thanks very much, Khurram. Thanks very much, folks, for hanging in there. This is the home stretch here. In about 10 minutes, I've got you ready to go. But in the meantime, please do ask your questions. If you have any questions about remote network setup, this is a really important subject in the land of Prisma Access. So please do ask those questions, and our experts will make sure to attend to them. If we can go to the next slide, I want to walk you through a few assets on Live Community that will help you understand and get most out of your Prisma Access solution, including Prisma Access 2.0. Out on Live Community, we've got all the details about what this new release has in it, including some exciting things like aggregate bandwidth, allocation capabilities that Khurram mentioned, and other things. All this is on our Live Community site that gives you a preview of what's in the release, as well as our detailed blog that describes what's in the release. Now, also on Live Community, if we can go on to the next slide, is our Prisma Access 2.0 upgrade. We are here to help page. And this page has all the details that you need for our new release, including our release FAQ, a very useful configuration verification checklist that allows you to verify that your environment is ready for the upgrade, and release notes that you want to read to make sure you know what's happening with this new release. The release FAQ, if we can go to the next slide, is where you'll find details like the cloud services plugin that will be released, which are your minimum Panorama and Global Protect versions that are supported. And if you've heard us talk before, you know that this is of some importance, so please do pay attention to these details. Also on this page, if you go to the next slide, is our upgrade schedule. And key points here are the Palo Alto Network status page. Make sure to subscribe to updates there. That will give you information about the entire Palo Alto Networks platform and anything that's happening across the platform. In addition, more specific to your Prisma Access environment, you will be notified through Prisma Access Insights. So critically important, as we've mentioned many times, is that please do subscribe to and sign up for alerts and notifications in Prisma Access Insights. And if we can go to the next slide, the status page, as I mentioned, is where you'll get information about all Palo Alto networks. If we go to the next slide, Prisma Access Insights is where you'll see this banner that'll say, hey, you've got a new software version. And that's where you click on that link, and it'll take us to the next slide, which shows you the choice that you can make, which is to pick a time in that date window that they give you. So Insights will give you a date, and you'll be able to pick a time during that for the first of your locations to be upgraded to the new release. And then everything goes on autopilot, and you will be notified 3 weeks prior to the actual upgrade through Insights and through email that your upgrade is coming in 3 weeks. Again, you'll be notified 3 days prior to the actual upgrade window. And finally, as the upgrade proceeds, you will be notified all along that here's what's happening. Very important point, as we've mentioned every time, please do continue to whitelist, allow list, you update your allow lists, and as part of the upgrade process, make sure you're whitelisting both active and reserved public IPs with your third party and other SaaS applications. All this is great, but if you run into a problem, our world-class customer support team is standing by to help you. Do not hesitate to open a ticket there, open a case, and they will attend to your issue as soon as they can. And that brings us to the close of our session here, and we'll take your questions if you have any. Panelists, any questions? And I will also make a point to remind you, as Sydney noted, next week we've got a great deep dive into Prisma Access Insights. This is a deeper dive into the tool that shows you some use cases and will help you understand how to get the most out of that and answer your organization's questions, frankly, about insights and access. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sydney. Any questions from our attendees?
No, looks like no questions at this moment. And we did answer questions throughout, but yeah, I think we're good for now. Yeah, I'll turn it back to anyone else that might have any last minute questions.
None here. Please do it. We did post a link in there if you're interested in the aggregate bandwidth allocation feature. There are some constraints around when you can deploy it. It's a fantastic feature. Just make sure you navigate through those requirements for it. And with that, I guess we can call this webinar to a close.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy your week. Cheers.
Bye-bye.